it's quite clear that the Israeli government is going to pursue this unless it is stopped by by some outside force, is going to pursue it to the ultimate end, and the ultimate end will be uh, the expulsion of the Palestinian people from their land, and if they won't go, then they will be killed, and that's what's happening now.
Okay, let's hit the scene. Whilst outside, one of the first real autumn storms hits the Netherlands. Back in July 2025, the UK government decided to proscribe Palestine Action as a terrorist organization. Mind you, we are not talking about a group planting bombs or carrying out armed attacks. Their trademark has been disruptive direct action, splashing paint on arms factories, chaining themselves to gates, occupying rooftops. Interestingly, a leaked intelligence report stated that most of these actions don't qualify as terrorism under Britain's own laws. Yet, virtually hundreds of people have been arrested, some just for holding up signs or chanting, as you will hear in the following interview. That has nothing to do with counterterrorism, that's simply squashing an uncomfortable narrative. But it doesn't stop there and it doesn't stand alone. This move slots neatly into a much bigger structure, one that's being built across Europe and NATO. Let's start with NATO's so-called cognitive warfare program. The military now openly says that the battlefield of the future isn't just land, sea, air, or even cyberspace, it's the human mind. That means every protest, every tweet, every slogan gets recast as a potential security threat. Suddenly, citizens like you aren't citizens anymore. They are valid cognitive targets. And once you frame people that way, branding protesters as terrorists becomes just the next logical step. Now bring in the EU's Council Decision CFSP 2025/966. I know it sounds boring. It's dressed up as a foreign and security policy coordination, but in practice it gives governments a ready-made toolkit for censorship, surveillance, and coercion. It lowers the bar for shutting people down under the banner of unity, stability, and security. And with shutting down, I mean freezing bank accounts, restricting travel, and blocking internet access. So when Britain bans Palestine Action and Brussels nods along, that's not an accident. That's the machinery working exactly as designed. And then there's digital IDs. The pitch is slick. One login for all your devices, safe and secure. But link that ID to your online posts and suddenly your access to the internet, your banking, even your travel, all hangs on staying within the approved lines. You put that together with proscription laws and NATO's cognitive warfare doctrine, and you've got the perfect recipe for erasing all critical voices. And it's not just that your group can get banned. You as a person, you can be digitally switched off. So what are we really looking at? A convergence. Military strategists, unelected EU bureaucrats like Kaya Kallas, and domestic security agencies tightening the screws on opposition, criminalizing critical narratives related to the wars in, say, Palestine, Ukraine, and soon, China. And in preparing societies for the wars they're steering us into, they do all of that. Free speech becomes subversion. Activism gets relabeled as extremism. Journalism gets brushed off as disinformation. I have reported on NATO's cognitive warfare program, the EU's Council Decision CSFP 2025, the digital IDs, and the power of unelected officials like Kaya Kallas before. The links, if you're interested, are in the description. All of this is the backdrop for today's conversation. I'm joined by Colonel Chris Romberg, someone who has been on the inside and who has seen how the trends are changing. And mind you, not for the better. Colonel Chris Romberg, what a pleasure having you. Thank you for taking the time. How are you?
Thank you for letting me be here.
You're most welcome. Maybe we should give a brief shout out to Mark Etkind. How do I pronounce his name?
Edkind.
Etkin. Okay. He introduced me to you. He told me about you. He sent me your contact information, and here we are. So I said already, Colonel Chris Romberg. In a nutshell, I have a little bit of information in front of me, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So, as the colonel already indicates, you spent your life your professional life in the army. You are British Army officer and defense attaché for, I get two different, including the 29 years commando regiment, but you served for 33 years in the army. Is that correct?
Yes. The regiment is called 29 Commando Regiment.
Okay, not 25,
I didn't
not
spend
29 years.
29 years in it.
Sorry.
That was
Sorry. Okay.
That was the regiment I mostly served with.
Yeah, 33 years, that's a long time. And you were defense attaché for the UK embassies in Egypt and Jordan.
That's correct, yes. So that was
Yes,
the last 6-7 years of my service I spent there.
I just wanted to ask, how long have you been in Jordan?
So I was in Jordan for 4 years and then 2.5 years in Egypt.
When were you in Jordan? I will come back to why I'm asking you about Jordan, but when?
Not at all. So in Jordan, arrived beginning of 2001, and in 2004, I left back to the UK for a short break, and then 2005 to 2007, I was in Egypt.
I'm asking about Jordan because I have been in Jordan a number of times. I've interviewed 4 top diplomats, one of which was the former foreign minister, Dr. Marwan Mouasha. And all 4 told me that they're concerned about exactly what Trump and Netanyahu have proposed with, Gaza to become the new Riviera, to remove all Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank into Jordan and Egypt. So at that time already, all 4 of them were concerned about that. Did you get anything of these kind of, how should I say, tendencies whilst you were in Jordan and Egypt?
There's a very long historical concern in Jordan about what could happen to the Palestinian population in the occupied West Bank, particularly, but even in Israel itself. And they have the experience from 1948, from 1947, of large numbers coming in, and large numbers of the population in Jordan is of Palestinian origin. And the Jordanians did take them in, have given them Jordanian nationality, but they are very concerned about this. And of course, they have had other countries from whom refugees have come, from Syria, from Iraq, and Jordan as itself, as a small population, has had to absorb these large numbers coming in. So it's always been a great concern, and probably never more so than at the moment.
There were even suggestions, and I heard this, how shall I say this, through the grapevine, that, Israel suggested to move more Palestinians into Jordan specifically, then get rid of the king and establish the Palestinian state in Jordan, as opposed to Gaza and the West Bank.
There have very often been statements from various Israeli politicians that Jordan is Palestine. And this is very concerning and even frightening to the Jordanian government and authorities. So that's something they've just been worried about all this time. And never has it looked more frightening than it does at the moment.
Very true. Before we dive deeper into the interview, let's go back to your career. I saw Korea is a good one in relation to my next point. In August this year, you were arrested alongsst hundreds of others during a peaceful protest against UK government's ban on the civil disobedience group called Palestine Action. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Palestine Action was, as you say, a direct action or civil disobedience group. I've never been a member of that group, but they had done a number of activities, principally against Israeli weapons factories that are located in the United Kingdom. That's included blocking the entrances, spraying paint, entering them, smashing machinery. So acts of damage against property. And their last, or one of the last actions before they were banned, was to break into a Royal Air Force base and spray paint on 2 aircraft. They're the type of aircraft that are being used in the Middle East at the moment. So following those actions, the British government banned them under the Terrorism Act 2000, legislation that was brought in by the Blair government. And this is the first time that such terrorism legislation has been used against a direct action group that has not been shown and proved to be violent against people. Now, most people's idea of terrorism is violence against people, killing and wounding people by shooting, bombing, stabbing, driving vehicles into crowds. People don't think of terrorism as being actions against property, not of that scale. So this was quite a break with British tradition, you might say, because there is a long history of direct action groups that have changed British legislation, brought in freedoms, brought in rights. None more so than the suffragettes, which brought in the right to vote for women.
But why did they arrest you?
So following the ban, there were legal challenges to the ban, but there were also protests organized. And a group called Defend Our Juries, of which, again, I'm not a member, but they had their origins in some of the legislation and some of the cases that were brought against climate protesters, where people had called on the juries in these cases to vote according to their conscience. Now, Britain still has a jury system, which also is used in the United States. Many countries in mainland Europe don't have this system. And juries are made up of ordinary citizens who are called in, and they decide whether the person being accused is guilty or not guilty. And one of the long-standing principles is that they can decide according to their consciences. So in such cases as climate protest, people have said, yes, we did damage, but we're being accused of a crime, but we were trying to prevent a greater crime. And juries have agreed with them. And judges don't necessarily like this. And a judge in one case had a woman arrested for holding up the sign which says that a jury may vote according to their conscience, even though that statement is written in a stone plaque in the Royal Courts of Justice in London. And so this movement, Defend Our Juries, has its origins in protest in support of this right of juries to vote according to their conscience. And they organized protests following the ban of Palestine Action. And on the 9th of August, they organized a large protest in London on Parliament Square, which is in the shadow of Big Ben, the tower above the Houses of Parliament. And over 500 people, including myself, turned up on that day in order to protest. And the form that the protest took was that it had been agreed amongst us we would bring a blank piece of card and a marker pen. And at 1 o'clock, as the bell of Big Ben told 1, we all wrote the same message onto our pieces of card. And the message that people wrote was, and I quote, "I oppose genocide. I support Palestine Action, unquote. Those are the words that were written on the card. And that second statement has been considered enough by the government, by the police, to arrest people under the terrorism legislation. And shortly after we had sat down with those signs, the police began to make arrests.
Random, or targeted?
Well, there were over 500 people there.
Yeah.
And they chose people, I don't know on what basis, but they just started arresting those. They couldn't arrest all 500 at once, but they started arresting individuals. And through the course of the afternoon, over 500 people were arrested. I myself was arrested later in the afternoon, around about 6 o'clock, and was one of the later ones to be arrested.
And I mean, not everybody is familiar. I mean, arrested. So what exactly does this entail, and when did they release you?
So what it entails is you're taken into custody by the police. Now, the way that people reacted and the way the police dealt with it was varied a bit. But everybody who was taking part in this protest, who had signed up to it and who held up these pieces of card with the writing on, was sitting on the ground for most of the time, occasionally standing, and some people who couldn't sit on the ground were sitting on small seats. In some cases, people were sitting in wheelchairs, and the police came to arrest them. Many people went, and this is a term from protests, went floppy. That is, they just lay down or stayed sitting and wouldn't stand up, and the police had to carry them off. And many people did that. So it took several police officers each time to carry them off. And I myself chose to walk off for reasons. I have some trouble with my back. I didn't want to jeopardize that, and I chose to walk off. But many people did not, and full respect to them. It made the job of the police more difficult. It made it all take much longer time. And I will say that the police acted properly. They, on the whole, with a few exceptions, I think one or two things on that protest, they should have done better. In one case, they applied handcuffs to somebody next to me. I didn't see why that was necessary. He was not resisting. He was prepared to be arrested. That's almost why he was there. And that was unnecessary. And they did one or two other things that were not so good. They allowed Zionist counter-protesters to come in amongst us early on, which caused some trouble, some scuffles. But generally, the police on the ground behaved decently and did not use violence. They just carried it out. They did not seem happy with what they had to do. So my criticism is not of the police who carried out the arrests, but of their senior commanders who have taken this course, and of course the government that has put them in position where they have to do it.
Yeah. And very briefly, you actually went to jail, or how did it go?
So on that occasion, the police had planned for a large number of arrests, and they took us to a nearby street which they blocked off between two government buildings. And they blocked it off, and they'd set up temporary facilities there where they processed hundreds of people. So they had two streets like that. But the one I was taken to is called King Charles Street, named after a previous monarch, not the current one.
Not this one there.
And that is where the British Foreign Office is located. And it was slightly ironic for me that when I was working in British embassies as a defense attaché, my official postal address from the UK was through the Foreign Office in King Charles Street. And that's what was written on my driving license at the time. And here I was being processed after arrest. So I and hundreds of others had been arrested. We'd been warned in the normal way. We were taken away in a van. We were taken through this facility where when I arrived, there were long queues in front of these small tents set up where the police were processing people. And we've been told, do not bring identification, so that the police would have to arrest you. And I had done that. And they then, I said I wouldn't give my name until we arrived in a police station. But and I didn't have any ID on me. So they were going to take me away to a police station. And that would have taken a lot longer. I was prepared to do that. They were threatening to say, oh, there are no police stations free in London. We'll have to take you far away to hundreds of miles. But I didn't really believe that. But I was prepared to go along with whatever they did. As it happened, my son was standing outside by the van and he gave me my ID card. So I went back in. I was processed along with hundreds of others. And that took a further couple of hours. So eventually I was released on bail. So I've been arrested, have not been charged, have not been brought in front of a judge, have not had to go to jail. But this is bail, which has a condition applied. I must report back to the police in October. And I'm not allowed to take part in any demonstration concerning Palestine Action.
Will you comply?
There was another demonstration, as you probably know, on the 6th of September.
Also with arrests?
Also with arrests, even more arrests. And that went slightly differently. But I did not attend that. I know some people who were arrested and bailed chose to attend, even though it was a breach of their bail conditions. I chose not to do that because I thought it might impede me from speaking publicly. And I knew I still had a number of interviews to give, including this one. And I thought if I breach the bail conditions, it may make it more difficult for me to be able to speak publicly.
Understand. Now, I would like briefly come back to Egypt and Jordan, just out of curiosity, because I mean I know a number of people whose point of view has changed after having lived and worked in countries such as these. So I have two questions, and I know it's not a good idea to ask compound questions. But first of all, what were the key events that took place when you were in each country? That's the first question. And the second question, which we can deal later with, is what made you, I mean, as a career army man, were you exposed to certain things that the rest of the society gladly don't have to? But what made you change your point of view? That's the second question. Let's go first to the first one.
Yes.
What happened when you were in Egypt and in Jordan?
So while I was in Jordan, the Intifada was going on, and there were actions being taken against Palestinian people. So this is in the years 2001 onwards, 2001 to 2004, and all the time there was action against Palestinian people going on right next door, and this was being reported the whole time, and feelings were running quite high. So that was one aspect going on, and the other one, of course, was 2001, the attacks on New York and Washington, the planes being crashed in there, and then the subsequent war on terror and the invasion of Iraq, and this had obviously huge impact on the region and on Jordan in particular. So that was the main thing that was going on while I was in that country. In Egypt, less so. Obviously the invasion of Iraq and of Afghanistan, the occupation there was still ongoing, but there was not quite the same single event, if you will, that caused disruption. The big event that came was a couple of years later, with what was then, in a spirit of undue optimism, called the Arab Spring. But at that time, that seemed quite a long way off. So you then asked what sort of position was I in? I was working there as a military officer, but as a diplomat. So I had quite a privileged position, if you will, within the country, but it gave me an opportunity to see what was going on both on the ground, so to speak, but also at a diplomatic and political level. Because when you work in an embassy, you see an awful lot of traffic. A lot of information comes in. Some of it diplomatic reports, some of it policy information, some of it intelligence, and you can build up a very good picture both of what is happening and how the government is reacting to it. And you can get around yourself, especially in Jordan. I was able to move around. I got to know a lot of people. I got to see a lot of things. And in Egypt, slightly more difficult, slightly more closed society, certainly from an official level. We were able to travel, but they kept more tabs on us, if you will. But I was also fortunate that through colleagues, I could visit the neighboring countries. And this was encouraged, so we should inform ourselves of the whole region. So I could visit Syria, I could visit Lebanon, and I could visit Israel and the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Gaza. So didn't spend a huge amount of time there, but still seeing it, even relatively briefly, was an eye-opener of what really was happening on the ground.
I don't know if you know him. I interviewed Gideon Levy. He's a very prominent journalist in Israel, and he said exactly the same. He invites young people, come just for 2 or 3 days, have a look at yourself, and you will wake up. That's virtually what he told me. Yeah.
But you asked what changed me. I think even before that, I felt I was quite well informed about the Middle East. I'd previously served in Oman, which is quite a long way away from Palestine, but nevertheless, it is in the Middle East. I'd informed myself for some years about what was going on in Palestine and Israel, and I felt I knew about it. But then being there and seeing really what was happening then, and of course the situation had got a lot worse over the years. Every decade has been worse in terms of the oppression of Palestinian people. And by the early 2000s, it was looking extremely bad. Of course, it is as nothing compared to what is happening now. But what I saw then really opened my eyes, not just to what was going on, but also how Western governments, including the British government, were acting towards the countries, the people of the Middle East. Mm. And after I left the army, then I was able to be more active, if you will, in campaigns and support in the cause of Palestinian people.
As an army man and very high level, if you look at the military strategy of Israel, what do you deduct? What do you think they really want?
Well, very high level. There are, of course, many officers and soldiers who served longer than me, had seen more active service, and generals who are much more senior. So I put it in that context. But I have had the opportunity of several years in the Middle East and in a defense and diplomatic context. And it's been clear that there are long-term aims for the Israeli government. And those long-term aims include the total removal of the Palestinian people from the area of Greater Israel, and Greater Israel including the West Bank and Gaza, East Jerusalem. And it appears from indications that they've given, the maps that Netanyahu has shown, and the actions in terms of moving into Syria, annexation of the Golan Heights, moving into Syria, moving into Lebanon, that it isn't going to stop there either. And this has been the long-term aim. And each year, each decade has shown further progress in that. And now a whole number of factors have combined, which are seen as the best opportunity that Israel has ever had in order to progress that. Of a combination of an attack by Hamas and others breaking out from Gaza, which obviously was a violent attack, and on which violent acts and killings took place, but which has been blown up to form a justification for a much greater attack in the other direction. And I can't condone that. Nothing condones what is going on, because what is going on is a genocide, and nothing whatsoever, even a violent attack, does not justify genocide. But that is how it has been taken, quite obviously. It was an opportunity to expand the war that's been going on for decades. Plus, at the same time, the fact that there have been administrations in the United States that are prepared to go completely along with this. Obviously, the Trump administration and the Biden administration beforehand, and the weakness of the surrounding states, who are also prepared to go, and of the Europeans. And I think this is quite a change from what there might have been in previous years. And so all these factors have combined, and it's quite clear that the Israeli government is going to pursue this, unless it is stopped by some outside force, is going to pursue it to the ultimate end. And the ultimate end will be the expulsion of the Palestinian people from their land. And if they won't go, then they will be killed. And that's what's happening now.
Noam Chomsky told me he fears that the Palestinians will have a similar fate as the Native Americans.
Well, Yasser Arafat famously said that they were not, and he used a not politically correct term, which was common at the time, which was we are not the Red Indians, he said. Well, we don't use that term anymore, but he is saying we are not the Native Americans. We will not be confined to reservations and be commemorated with a few craft shops. And the danger is that they will get very close to it, and that they would only exist in exile.
Yeah, if they're lucky in quotation marks.
Yes.
Worst could happen, yeah. Well, I completely agree with you. I said in a number of interviews, I think October the 7th was a God-sent gift for specifically Netanyahu for a number of reasons. Yeah? But again, asking you specifically as an army man, this is why it's very interesting for me. There were on October the 7th, on some areas, I mean, I forgot, I think on 29 places the breakout took place. And on some places, it took more than 72 hours before the Israeli army arrived. Now, as we know, Israel is the size of a post stamp. I heard the kind of rationalization. Yeah, but they were all in the West Bank. Well, an Apache helicopter takes minutes from, So what's your explanation that it took so long on some places for the army to arrive?
Well, I wasn't there, and I have no insight into the machinations inside the Israeli government. So it is, what I'm saying is speculation. But I think it's a mixture of factors, and some may speculate that this was allowed to happen, that the government was aware the breakout was coming, that they wanted to have a big attack, and they were prepared to give up Israeli lives in order to have an attack that they could use to justify to the world for what they would subsequently do. I'm not going to go along with that because I have no evidence that that is the case, that such a conspiracy did happen. And I mean that. I'm not just putting it out there. I know people have said this. I think a number of factors will have played into it. Part of it was a certain amount of complacency on behalf of the Israeli armed forces, that they felt they had the situation under control. And beforehand, I mean, that they had people bottled up in Gaza, that yes, they might lob out the odd homemade rocket, but nothing serious was going to happen. They could control them, and every now and then they would, as they call it, mow the lawn, and therefore there would have been surprise, and there was contempt for the enemy, which is always very, very dangerous. And there was also something that a previous colleague who knew the Israeli armed forces well told me, which is that many of them are very badly trained, especially in the army. People who do their conscripts who do their national service,
they're all reservists, yeah.
and reservists are not well trained. And the serving in the West Bank and beating up grandmothers and terrorizing shepherds and arresting children is one thing when they're all unarmed and you're heavily armed. But fighting albeit lightly armed, but determined resistance force in Gaza is quite another. And I think all these factors came into play as well.
It's a matter of public record that Egypt warned Israel twice in regards to the coming attack. I also saw that there were the border guards, the female border guards, who also tried to raise the alarm, were ignored, and today they're all dead. So it's not so that, I mean, this is what we know. Yeah, in the background, diplomatic and Secret Service, there must have been more information, of course. So I do not personally, and again, I don't want to go too deep into speculation and conspiracy, but it's a matter of public record that Egypt warned Israel twice about the coming attack. And then one thing that struck me, these guys came with paragliders. Now I'm flying paragliders. You have to learn this. You have to train this. Where did they do this? How did they do that? In Gaza? How?
Not in the tunnels.
No, not in the tunnels. Yeah. So something really struck me as odd here, but it doesn't matter if they knew it or if they didn't know it. It was a God-sent gift for Netanyahu. I think without it, he would already be gone. Which brings me to the next question to you. It's a bit like Putin. Yeah, they say get rid of Putin or get rid of Netanyahu, and problems are solved. I would always argue, be careful what you wish for, because it might come true. The predecessors, the successors of both gentlemen might be worse than Netanyahu or Putin.
Well, I think this is very true. I think that focusing on Netanyahu is an excuse for many in the West to gloss over the history of Israel and the path that has been taken. This is not one single man who has led the government and the country down a strange path that's completely different from what there was before. This is almost the natural culmination so far. And I'm sure, and I'm not an expert on the internal politics in Israel, but even opposition figures, that some of whom are considered moderate or liberal, have come up with similar overall policies and talk about another 50 years of war. And they may not use exactly the same tactics and they may not use the same language, but in the end, the direction of travel will be the same.
I recently interviewed Ken McCarthy, and he published a book in which I mean, the book basically is comprised of 80% of formal documents and only 20% narrative. But what he publishes is the complete letter communication between Ben Gurion and John F. Kennedy. And it was specifically in regards to the Dimona reactor, oversight, registering APEC as a foreign agent, etc., etc. And I'm reading this, and you can see clearly that not only Ben Gurion, but also his successor systematically lied to Kennedy. They said, no, 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 don't worry, there will be no weapons. This is all peaceful. And that they stalled and stalled and stalled. I'm mentioning this because exactly like you said, this didn't start on October the 7th. There's 75 years of occupation. Gutierrez, UN General Gutierrez, was almost lynched by the Israeli ambassador to the UN when he said October the 7th didn't fall out of a vacuum. So it's exactly like you said. If you disregard the history, if you disregard the context, it's very easy to paint the picture in just black and white.
Absolutely. I mean, I will say that I don't know anybody in Hamas or any of those organizations in Gaza. I'm purely speculating, but I think there were, and people talk about, it was a great miscalculation and so on. It's wrong. It's not for me to judge how what they were thinking of beforehand, but I do estimate that there were some miscalculations that they did make when they went there. They knew, obviously, this was going to be a major blow, and they knew there would be retaliation. And that must be obvious, because there had been beforehand with such actions. And this was a bigger one than they had done before. I mean, there were a previous time when they fired rockets, or they had come across and grabbed an Israeli soldier and taken him hostage, but this was obviously going to be a much bigger operation. But nevertheless, I feel that there were things that they weren't expecting. And one of the things they weren't expecting was how well they would succeed in terms of how far they could go, how many people they would capture, how many people they would kill. And leaving aside a question about how many they killed, how many were military, how many civilians, so on, they did kill people, no doubt about it. And I don't think they expected to be able to do that much damage to Israel. And some of that was because of the complacency and the Israeli armed forces had. The second thing that they miscalculated on was, in the past, when they've taken hostages, then the Israeli government did its best to get those hostages back. And although there was retaliation and people were killed, but in the end there was negotiation and an exchange took place, usually many more Palestinians being exchanged, but then many more Palestinians are being held. So a single Israeli soldier would be then exchanged for hundreds of Palestinians, but that would take place, and that was part of what they would seek to achieve. They expected what ultimately happened, and of course that hasn't happened. There's been some negotiation, some release of hostages. In fact, most of the hostages that have been released were released through negotiation, but there hasn't been the same emphasis on negotiation that there was before. There's just
not only sorry,
yeah.
not only that, but now they're killing systematically the negotiators.
Yes.
I mean, we just had seen in Qatar. I mean,
yes.
Americans apparently invited them over to negotiate, and they're being killed.
Yes,
well, it's not the first time.
Sorry, we can come to that in a moment. Just say my third point, which is, in the past, and I think Hamas must have expected that. Yes, there's been terrible retribution, terrible retaliation, and hundreds have been killed of Palestinians as a result. of what's taken place. But ultimately, after there has been that retribution, hundreds of killed, maybe over 1,000 killed, then the Western countries, especially the United States, have said, all right, that's enough. Now, we'll call a halt there, told the Israelis to stop. After all, if you remember back in 1982 in Lebanon, then both Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher put pressure on the Israelis to stop. And they stopped. And I think that was probably expected. There would be terrible retribution, but ultimately it would be stopped by the West. And that was the third miscalculation. That didn't happen. That hasn't happened. That isn't happening now. There's been no holding back.
That's true. And again, from my visit to Jordan last year, I spoke with many people who said, yes, it's terrible what happens right now, but in a very twisted way, it's good that it happens. So they're expecting a different outcome than is projected by us, the West, and Israel. And if you look at the world opinion, little by little it's changing. And my latest example is the recent speech of Ursula von der Leyen, where she spends first the most of her times talking about Ukraine. But then she switches over to Palestine, and it's the first, I'm not saying it's the first time she said it, but it's certainly the first time I heard her saying it, that she condemns what's happening, especially the famine, the man-made famine, etc., etc. So there is a shift. And coming back to the UK, why is Herzog there today? It's under pressure. Yeah. So, but we come to that.
Well, Herzog is there today because he wanted to come. But
yeah, but he doesn't come out of the blue. There's a strategic reason why he's coming. Yeah.
Yeah. So he comes, but he is coming partly because they feel under pressure. But the UK government, it's an indication of the UK government's weakness, though, towards Israel, that they accept him, that they don't say no, that they still feel that they have to have him in. And this is a man who was cited in the International Court of Justice as part of the evidence through his statements of the intent for genocide. So his statement, there are no civilians, nobody is innocent in Gaza, was part of the evidence that was given for the genocidal intent. This is a man who's the president of a country that is charged with genocide at the ICJ, and which has been found to have probable cause, and where internationally the International Association of Genocide Scholars have agreed that it's committing genocide, and whose prime minister is a wanted war criminal. This is a man who signed artillery shells that were being used. And I'm a former artillery officer. Artillery shells are by their nature not pinpoint accurate. They're not intended to be. They're intended to cover areas. So these were shells that were going to go in and not take out individual targets, specifically targeted against a fighter. This is fairly indiscriminate weapon that was being fired into civilian areas. And he was signing messages onto these shells. And he is allowed to come to Britain, and he is invited in by the Prime Minister. And it's a sign of a way that is shameful for the country. And the excuses that are given by the government just won't wash. You say, oh, we must keep diplomatic channels open. Well, yes, I would agree with that. I have no doubt diplomatic channels have been kept open even in the most extreme circumstances. I'm sure there were diplomatic channels through to the Germans in the Second World War, the Germans in the First World War, and so on. But they weren't being done by inviting the leaders over and rolling out the red carpet. Having said that, there is clear signs for the government that it's not being easy, because it is unusual for a head of state to come to Britain and to have noisy, loud protests going on while he is visiting, for having members of parliament speaking out of and criticizing the visit, for having reporters shouting at Herzog as he approaches the door of Downing Street. Are you a war criminal? Are you proud that your country is being accused of genocide? Shouting out at Prime Minister Starmer. Are you happy greeting a war criminal as he comes in? All right, these were not mainstream journalists, but nevertheless, this is being shouted out. That protests outside Downing Street, outside Chatham House, where he was speaking, outside his hotel, where he couldn't even go in through the front door, so it's reported. He had to come in through the back door and the kitchen. That the protests of noisy and going on there all the time. This is not usual for the visits of heads of state, and is encouraging that certain changes are taking place. And it's quite clear that in the orchestration of it, of British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is aware of that, because it's quite telling that when they had their little photo opportunity, both inside and outside of Downing Street, they seem to make a point of not smiling. But just, oh no, it's very, very serious going on there. And the government knows that there is a disconnect between what they are doing and saying and the people. And the majority of people in Britain, polls have shown, are not approving of what Israel is doing. And those are changes. And you've referred to some of the changes. I mean, you referred to Ursula von der Leyen changing her tone. And many politicians are changing their tone. It's still words, it's still not actions, it's still performative. But there's a recognition that perhaps things are not going quite as well as they hoped that they might do.
There is a bright side and a dark side to it. The bright side is, of course, that there are changes coming. I'm convinced. It takes way too long, but changes are coming. But on the dark side is Israel knows that. So they know they have to use the time as best in quotation mark as they can, and they will not act like the proverbial elephant in the china shop, but as a wounded elephant in the China shop. Yeah? They will take as much territory as they can. They will expel and kill as many Palestinians as they can. If you see the drone footage from Gaza, it's a moonscape. Coming back to the artillery shells that you mentioned, I'm positive that the artillery shells have advanced since you used them last. Today, there's a total different ball game, so to speak. Yeah. So there is a thread, and I'm looking at my notes here. So one of the items that I picked out here was the discussion that the UK is recognizing or might recognize Palestine as a state. And here comes the qualifier. If Israel continues with what they're doing, meaning they, first of all, how long? What is when would that happen? Yeah, but that would kind of seal the status quo. Yeah, it doesn't address where the Palestinians would go, whatever. But that they mention it is already, exceptional. How realistic do you think is it that the UK is recognizing Palestine as a state?
Well, this is more performative talk from the UK, from the UK's government, and is not a real step forward. So many of the things that they have said under pressure, because they realize that they are out of step with what much of the population wants. And so a lot of these statements that they have made, and even actions that they've taken, are more performative than substantive. Even such things as these minor restrictions on arms sales are just more performative when the majority of the arms sales are still going ahead. And for Britain, arms sales are a relative minor part of their cooperation with Israel. they're a very small supplier. I'm sure there are some important things that they're doing. The parts for the F-35 jets and so on are obviously quite important. But in terms of quantity, this is very small beer compared to what the US and Germany are pumping in there. But even so, it was some tiny percentage. What was it? 13% or something of all arms sales are going to be restricted, and which means the vast majority are still going to go ahead. Of course, the cooperation, the military cooperation, goes much further, and it isn't particularly in the delivery of weapons. It's in military cooperation, the overflights that are going to take place over Gaza, the sharing of intelligence, the use of RAF Akrotiri, the purchase of weapons from Israel, the training of Israeli officers in the United Kingdom, the hosting of visits by Israeli officers. All that military cooperation is going on. And for me, as a former officer in the British Army, I feel this is just shameful that our armed forces are being misused in this manner. And I've made the point before that this is the anniversary, the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. And that concentration camp was not the first camp to be liberated. The Soviet forces liberated camps in the East and liberated Auschwitz and other camps. But it was the first that the British forces came across. And what they found deeply shocked them and deeply shocked the nation. And these pictures were shown days later in the newspapers. And people Britain had been at war with Germany for 5 years by then, and Britain had suffered. Its armed forces had suffered, also it suffered bombardment, the Blitz, as it was called, on London. But this was something different. Suddenly, the people were really, really shocked at what Germany had been doing. And the British armed forces liberated the camp. They conducted the first trials for crimes against humanity of the camp personnel. And they did their best to save those who had survived in the camp, and many of them were beyond saving. And these were horrendous pictures that they saw. And now, 80 years later, we are seeing also horrendous pictures, starving babies blown to pieces, civilians murdered, corpses, people being maltreated. And this time, the British armed forces are not being used to go in there and alleviate the suffering. And I'm not talking about little performative acts like dropping aid from aircraft. I'm talking about really going in, at the very least, going in, sending in ships with aid. No, we're not doing that. We are assisting, we are supporting, we're complicit. And I feel it's just shameful that our government is using the British armed forces in that way, in support of a genocide rather than stopping one.
You just reminded me of something that I neglected to mention, that you are actually a son of a Holocaust survivor. So I should have mentioned this at the very beginning. So you are from Austria originally, I believe, and then to Germany, fled to Germany. Your parents fled to Germany. Maybe give us a brief encapsulation.
So it was my father. I obviously am not a Holocaust survivor myself, but my father and his parents and his other members of his family, his sister, were in. My father was born in Austria before the First World War, and grew up, went to school, studied, and was working in Austria as a lawyer. And the family were there in 1938. The family was of Jewish origin. Both my father's parents had been born into fully Jewish families. They'd chosen to convert their religion to Christianity. So they were not practicing Jews, but they had grown up as Jews, and certainly for the Nazis, there was absolutely no question about it. They were Jewish. And in 1938, in the so-called Anschluss, Germany took over Austria. which many in Austria at the time welcomed, and they realized they had to leave. And they were fortunate. My grandfather had worked for a while in Britain in the 19th century, and he'd worked in Manchester, and he had quite liked it in Britain, and he'd managed to get British nationality and had a British passport. But he went back to Germany, where he came from. He was born in Leipzig, and then to Austria, where he married my grandmother, and they lived there, and that's where their life was. They were German speakers. They were Austrian and German. My father was born there, grew up there. Their whole life was in Vienna. But having that British passport, which had lain in a drawer somewhere, meant that they could leave, which was important, of course, and also meant that they could arrive in Britain, which for many of those who fled, of course, was not possible. Britain hadn't opened its arms to people fleeing from Germany and other territories that were occupied by the Germans or allied with the Germans. But they were able to come because they had those British passports. But they have to leave their lives behind, their friends behind, wider family behind, their property behind, and start again in London. And I'm in a group that is called Holocaust Survivors and Descendants Against the Gaza Genocide. And everyone there we have two actual Holocaust survivors who survived as children, who are in their 80s. And everyone else has got parents or grandparents who survived. And many of them have far more harrowing stories even than that of my family. Surviving camps, surviving ghettos, hiding. But what unites all of us is that we see what is going on now, and we oppose it. And people have terrible stories from their own family background, and do not want to see that being repeated again.
Yes, I think that gives you a certain gravity with that background. Because you said what the images that are coming out of Gaza now are very reminiscent to what we saw after or in the Second World War. I mean, if you make these pictures black and white, there is no difference. Starving, skeletized children, but also adults. I have spoken with a number of subject matter experts who estimate the actual death in Gaza on 200,000. 200,000, that's almost 10%. I mean, imagine. For any other country, percentage-wise, this is a staggering number. And then every time a number comes from within Gaza, then it's always with a qualifier, comes from this or that organization, which is apparently not neutral. But if you imagine that percentage of that in this is the second, I believe, the second the second most densely populated place on this planet. That was Gaza. The second, I believe, second or third, something like that. Yeah. And then you shell in, I don't want to exaggerate now, but I think it was 2 or 3 times the explosive power of the nuclear bombs of Hiroshima, something like that. We the West threw on this little place, which is, what was it? Less than a marathon, less than 42 kilometers to run, right? Now, one more comparison, and I know that Israelis especially don't like to compare the Holocaust with what they did in 1948. But I interviewed 2 actual survivors of a massacre in Tantura. Deir Yassim is very well known. Tantura, lesser so, except for the fact that Alan Swartz made a documentary called Tantura, in which former Haganah Irgun soldiers were bragging and laughing and telling how they killed and raped and burned Palestinians, right? So I interviewed one survivor, a male survivor in Germany, and a female survivor in Amman, which incidentally sadly passed away just 3 weeks ago. And the stories that they told me, I mean, for the individual, for the village, it doesn't matter. If a village is massacred, also virtually massacred after they have surrendered, mass graves, throwing living people, wounded but living people in mass graves, etc. It doesn't matter. For them, for this village, that's the apocalypse. The scale doesn't really matter. Yeah. And one last thing, because it was really stunning. I interviewed through a number of coincidences. I was able to interview the daughter, and she lives in the UK, the daughter of a man who participated on the Israeli side in that specific massacre, right? So it's unbelievable. And this interview had now over 100,000 views in just 2 weeks. It's just incredible. What I want to say with this is the scale, in that sense, the scale doesn't really matter. If we say there are only 200,000 dead in Gaza, but we had what, 5, 6, 7, I mean, overall we had 55 million people dead in the Second World War, yeah? But 5, 6 million Jews who were in the worst way possible eliminated by the Germans. Yeah. So it seems history repeats itself, but from the other side. This time we have the victims, the perpetrators, which in psychology is not an uncommon phenomenon, interestingly. Right? So again, for you, as you are doubly affected, the son of a Holocaust survivor, then a military man. If you allow me, again, a little thingy. I often wondered, there were a lot of young soldiers sent to Iraq. I have pictures where they engraved on the helmets the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, thinking Saddam Hussein had anything to do with 9/11, which is absolutely untrue. So I was always wondering, you're a young you're a young soldier, someone is a young soldier, he's sent there. Maybe survive, maybe wounded, maybe not, but see, some of his friends are dead. They saw what they did there, and then they come back and find out, hey, it was all a lie. Was there ever a situation in your military career where you thought, this was not why we went there?
Well, I think the Iraq War is a good example. And I, I, I can't be hypocritical about this. Before the Iraq War, I was learning Arabic, and I had a teacher who was a professor from Iraq, and he was telling me horror stories about Iraq, and it was horrific. I'm sure, living under Saddam Hussein, and at that time, there'd been the war about Kuwait, and there was this sort of interim period where severe sanctions had been placed on.
You mean, sorry, to be specific, you mean between the First and Second Gulf War? That's what you mean?
Yes, right. If you call them that, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
some people call the first Gulf War the Iran-Iraq war, but yes, it will. So the 1991 and the time when Iraqi forces were pushed out of Kuwait, and then before the invasion in 2003. And during that period, there were sanctions, there were periodic bombings, and so on, and all of it was really unsatisfactory, and certainly wasn't helping the people of Iraq. And I felt this can't go on, and that the Western policy was unsatisfactory. You either do one thing, either stop all that and decide, okay, we'll live with Saddam Hussein, or go in there and sort it out. And with hindsight, I realized that was naive. But I before going out to Jordan, so in 2000, I was walking around the Ministry of Defense and saying to people, I think if we're going to carry on like this, we should go in there and invade and bring in a better government. And people laughed at me, literally laughed at me. It's, they'd be so stupid. Why? It's never going to happen. Well, a couple of years later, we were doing it. So I can't be hypocritical and say, I was always against it. I wasn't. But it became very clear quite quickly that what we were going to do wasn't going to succeed. It was going to succeed in overthrowing the regime, but it wasn't going to succeed in making life better straight away. Maybe eventually, but we're still waiting. And I was in Jordan on the eve of the invasion, and I happened to be invited where I met a whole load of UN staff who had been evacuated from Iran. And they were very, very bitter about what was happening. And I was saying to them, but what about the fact that the this will lead to the overthrow of the regime, overthrow of a terrible dictator and terrible dictatorship, and something better will take its place. And they said, the people of Iraq have the worst had already happened in as far as the dictatorship is concerned, and the people of Iraq had got used to it, and they knew how to live with it. And yes, bad things continue to happen, but on the whole, they were just come to terms with it. They were living with it, and they found a way of managing it. Whatever will follow will be worse. And they were right. And hundreds of thousands, if not millions, were killed. And the situation hasn't got better. And it's in Iraq is still suffering from that invasion. So I felt we were brought under that was a war that was fought obviously under false pretenses. And
That's what I was aiming for,
yes,
because I mean, it was false pretense. There
it was
was
never
a
to really help the people of Iraq, and we were briefed by quite a senior person from the British Foreign Office, Foreign Ministry, about why we were going in so shortly before and the political background to it. And he gave a number of reasons. And at the time, people were all saying, oh, it's all about oil, it's all about oil. Well, I don't think it was really about oil, certainly not for the British. And he gave a number of reasons. I can't remember all of them, but some of them stick in my mind, especially the final one, which was the main one. And it was to uphold the authority of the UN. Well, of course, that was absolute rubbish. It was the exact opposite. It undermined the authority of the UN because it didn't go in with the UN mandate. The UN wouldn't give a mandate.
technically it was a war
Fine.
crime.
Yeah.
Technically, it was a war crime.
And it was to protect Israel. And there was a number of other reasons, which I can't remember now, but the final one stuck very much in my mind, which was the important one. He said the main reason we're going in, to keep in with the Americans. And that, of course, is the major plank of British foreign policy and has been for decades and continues to be now.
The one thing, if you allow me, that stuck with me from those two wars, or the war against Iraq, was Madeleine Albright when she was asked if she found it justified. What most I should one step back. What most people don't realize, there was a very, very strict embargo between in those 10, 11 years between those two wars, and everything from pencil to medicines, whatever, was under embargo for dual use. And then 500,000 babies starved. And Madeleine Albright was asked. It wasn't CNN, I think it was CNBC. I'm not sure, but she was asked on live camera, "Do you find it justified that 500,000 babies starved to death?" And her first instinctive reaction was, and she said, "Yes, I find it justified." Yeah. So we this is so incredible. I mean, if you're an American or if you're a British person, and you overlay this, let's say, on no, specifically the Germans, against the British embargo, 500. Yeah, how would the British see that today? Yeah, or the Americans? I mean, this is so out of scale. And then you have a politician, far removed politician from a country on the other side of the world, saying, "Of course, I find it justified. 500,000 babies starved." So these are consequences for, again, coming back to, again, I'm not talking about you. I mean, make this more general. Army personnel, it doesn't matter which, yeah, which potentially have not given the true reason. Yeah, I mean, you guys, you risk your lives. I mean, I'm pretty sure you saw friends of yours die or get wounded. That always was intriguing me. How do you react then later on when you realize this was all a lie? Because this is what it was, right? And I'm asking this as a behavior analyst, and I apologize.
Yeah.
Yeah, how to deal with these kind of things. Yeah, especially later in life when you have time and energy and also the neocortex to reflect on those things, which you don't have when you are 19 years old when they make you do these kind of things, right?
Well, I, uh, I grew up in West Berlin, and I grew up very much thinking the West, which had its failings, which where things were going wrong and so on. And when I was a teenager and a student, the American war in Vietnam was going on. And things weren't perfect. But on the whole, I thought the West were the good guys. And over the other side of the wall were the bad guys. And uh, you grow up feeling that your side, usually, your side are the good guys. And you want to feel that. And you are brought up to feel that. And your education leads you to that. And I also grew up, as I said, my family is not Jewish. I didn't grow up. I'm not of the Jewish religion. I didn't really grow up in a Jewish family, although I have Jewish backgrounds from my father. There was a general sort of feeling that Israel was a good thing after the Holocaust. We didn't know all that was going on. The Nakba, talked about the Nakba. There were these Palestinians, we didn't really know who they were, and why were they causing trouble there, and why did they hijack planes, and so on. You grew up seeing the world as it's presented to you, and I would not say that if I had grown up in Israel, that I wouldn't feel that I should join the army and fight, and that we're fighting for our survival, and that we're fighting for a just cause. And as a young man, where would I have got the knowledge from to question that? And those who do question it, when you hear about these tiny number of refuseniks, I mean, I take my hat off to them because they have far greater insight than I would have had at that age. People believe, especially when you have a whole system, a whole society, media, education system that teaches you this, and every country does this to some extent, teaches you to believe in your own cause and your own country, then it's very hard to break out against that. And maybe your later experiences and your later studies will lead you to do so. But as young people grow up with that, and they will believe in it. And the same will applies to Western armies. And if your government and your media are telling you how things are, then you have to. It takes quite a mental effort to break out against that. You have to inform yourself in other ways, and it's therefore understandable that people will go off and fight. That doesn't justify it. Definitely doesn't justify it. It doesn't make it right. In the British Armed Forces, certainly when I was serving, and I hope it's still the case still today, there are lots of things you have to do every year. You have to fire your weapon and pass a test firing your weapon. You have to do fitness tests, and you have to practice with gas mask in case you have to face all these sort of tests that you have to do every year to make sure that you're fully trained. Now, one of the things you have to do every year is you have to have instruction on the laws of armed conflict and international humanitarian law. And everyone has this, and the Geneva Conventions. And it's clearly soldiers will not give that the same amount of importance as they do be able to fire their weapons. But that is done every year. And the idea is that our soldiers should know what international law means, what the Geneva Convention means, and should know how to comply with it and will be expected to comply with it. And I find it very distressing that what we're doing now is using the armed forces and in clear breaches of international law. And of course, it's the government's fault for employing them, but it's also distressing the armed forces are being used in this way, and that members of the armed forces should look at what they're doing and question what they're doing.
I had a number of speakers on this channel who later in life changed their point of view. One gentleman was actually in APAC, later in life changed his point of view completely. I have a number of those speakers, and I always ask them, what made you change your mind? Where was there an epiphany? And some people tell me, well, it's a gradual process. And some people told me there was this event, and suddenly, it was like I was waking up and I could see clearly. So I'm asking you, when did you realize something is not wrong on this whole mainstream narrative about Israel and Palestine?
For me, it was gradual. For me, it was a gradual process as I grew up. As I can't say I was an ardent Zionist. Far from it. I'm not Jewish. I never considered uh, going to live in Israel. But I grew up thinking of that Israel was a good thing. Holocaust, it deserved something, uh, and obviously I hadn't thought it through. I mean, if Jewish people deserved to have some land, it should have been taken from those people who had been the perpetrators. Why didn't they give them Bavaria? After all, they carved up other chunks of Germany and gave them Poland and Russia. They could have given the Jewish people Bavaria, but they didn't. They gave them somebody else's land. But I didn't think of going there. Strangely enough, I have a memory, and it's really odd. It's naive and silly. That as a schoolboy, I was a schoolboy in 1967 when the war uh, with Egypt and Jordan, Syria took place, and I thought it was quite exciting. I thought, oh, I should go out there and fight. And of course, naive. Of course, I didn't do it. It was silly, but it was that sort of attitude. And then gradually, as I grew up and went to university and started informing myself and learning a bit more, and then visited Israel, albeit very briefly, and saw things. And then before the army, I worked as a civil servant in the Ministry of Defense and saw a little bit of policy, and then in the army. And it was a gradual process. And of course, it continued and continued. And my time in the Middle East added considerably to that, things I saw then, which were bad enough. I mean, of course, there's nothing compared to what's happening now. But even then, things were bad and quite different from what was being portrayed. The official narrative that we get in the West was very, very, very different from what was actually happening on the ground. And of course, the last 2 years, 22 months have been horrific.
Yeah. Chris, you were very generous with your time. You were also very candid and frank, so I thank you for that. It was a really interesting discussion. So at the end, I always ask my guests, is there any topic that's close to your heart, something that we did not scratch?
Um, I think it's quite interesting talking about this tradition of direct action, which I've touched on very, very briefly in the United Kingdom, because right now the government is using terrorism legislation against people who are holding up pieces of cardboard with some writing on them. And of course, words have power, and words can be very bad. You can write things that you really shouldn't write, that would be severely criminal and that would be very, very harmful. But on the whole, most people's definition of terrorism would not include writing on a card. And Britain has a long history of people using direct action. I mentioned very briefly the suffragettes. The suffragettes were the group of women who campaigned to give women the vote in Britain. Now, most people think of them as little women who went around and had a sash and sang songs. And I think part of that is due to the film Mary Poppins, in which the mother of the children in the household is a suffragette. But actually, the suffragettes were very violent. they conducted bombings, they conducted arson attacks, they conducted attacks against people, and they, in the end, and they were very harshly treated, but in the end, they won the right, and now they're celebrated. And they're celebrated by our own politicians. And women politicians like dressing up like suffragettes and trying to draw some of the sort of shades of honor off them. And our Home Secretary, that is our Minister of the Interior, who was the one who banned the organization Palestine Action. She liked dressing up that way, that last one. She's now moved on. She's now our foreign secretary, our foreign minister. And Yvette Cooper. And she liked to dress up like that. And yet she is celebrating there, and she owes her position to women who were much more violent. That she celebrates them, but she bans an organization that hasn't been shown to be violent against people and certainly did not have it in its aims, even if it turns out that some individuals may use violence, but the organization itself did not have that in its aims at the time of it being banned. And at the time when the apartheid South Africa was still going on, there was a very strong anti-apartheid movement, and that movement in the UK did not use violence against people, but it did use violence against, or it did use what could be called criminal damage. And a former Labour Party minister, Peter Hain, now a Lord, who, given his due, has spoken out on this topic. And he was famous for having participated in criminal damage when South African sporting tours took place. And they damaged the cricket ground, for example, so the match couldn't take place. There's a long history of this. In 2003, at the time of the war against Iraq, there were people who broke into an airbase, an American airbase at Fairford in the UK, and damaged a lot of equipment, a lot, man. Aircraft, but also ground equipment and so on. And 5 of them were brought to court and became known as the Fairford Five. And they pleaded that they were, yes, they had done damage, but they were trying to prevent a greater crime. And one of them was successfully defended. And the defense team of this one who was successfully defended included the then lawyer, Keir Starmer, now the Prime Minister. So there is a lot of hypocrisy in what is going on here. And the reason why they're doing this is to protect to protect themselves and to protect the support that they're giving to Israel, and to suppress voices against it, and to suppress direct action against it, because it has been effective, and because they haven't found a better way to resist it, and therefore they choose the sledgehammer of using anti-terrorism legislation.
If you allow me very briefly, because it connects to what you just said. So the information control is increasing. Freedom of speech is really under attack. I have 3 different articles on Substack. One is about cognitive warfare, NATO's cognitive warfare program. I don't know if you heard about it, implemented since 2022. It's a pinpointed strategy to, it's a silent coup against people's thoughts. That's number 1. Number 2, in the UK, council decision CFSP 2025. That means they can freeze anyone's day, meaning the European Council, not any court in the UK or in the Netherlands or in Germany. The European Council can freeze anybody's bank accounts and the bank accounts of their family simply if you voice an opinion verbally or in writing that is counter the mainstream narrative. And then, because you're in the UK, of course, the digital ID, digital ID to access the internet means anything which they are implementing right now, right? So these kind of, I call it the velvet cage. Those are the three chains in the velvet cage. This is all being implemented in the background. Most people are completely unaware that it's happening, yet the first victims in quotation mark are already there. Yeah. So under CSFP 2025, native people are restricted from accessing their home country. I mean, this is the direction we are going. So instead of more freedom, it's the opposite. The right wing authoritarianism is everywhere on the rise. So I'm concerned in that respect with digital communication means and LLMs, also large language model means AI algorithms. We are sitting in a glass house. Anything we say, document, write, even if you don't send it, they're scanning already your phones. I also wrote about that. Okay, so we're looking at let's just say, I think it will get worse before it's getting better. Chris, again, I thank you for your time. It was my pleasure talking to you. I wish you all the best, and I will be in the UK not so long from now to interview some of the people that you also know.
Well, thank you for having me and letting me talk at such length. And it's been a pleasure being here. And I hope those other interviews with some people that I do know go well as well. So thanks very much, Thomas.
Thank you. All the best.